Well, here we are. It's Tuesday, September 6th, 2022. My name's Larissa, and we're going to continue reading Salman Rushdie's Haroun in the Sea of Stories. I have 2 chapters left, and I think we'll just finish it. We'll just do 2 chapters, so this is going to be a long one. Chapter 11, Princess Batcheat. Now, I must tell you quickly about everything that happened while Haroun was away in the Old Zone. Princess Batcheat Chatterjee, you will remember, was being held prisoner on the topmost room of the topmost tower of the citadel of Chup, the huge castle built entirely of black ice, which loomed over Chup City like an enormous pterodactyl or archipteryx. I've never heard of that dinosaur. So it was to Chup City that the Guppy army came with General Khatib, Prince Bolo, and Mudra, the shadow warrior, at its head. Chup City was in the deep heart of the perpetual darkness, and the air was so cold that it would freeze into icicles on people's noses, sounds like Detroit, and hang there until it was broken off. For this reason, the Chupwalas who lived there were little spherical nose warmers that gave them the look of circus clowns, except that the nose warmers were black. Red nose warmers were issued to the pages of Gup as they marched into the darkness. Really, this is beginning to look like a war between buffoons, thought Rashid, the storyteller, as he put on his false red nose. Prince Bolo, who found the things distinctly undignified, knew that a frozen icicle-dangling nose would be even worse, so he sulked terribly, but stuck his nose warmer on as well. Then there were the helmets. The pages of Gup had been allocated the oddest headgear Rashid had ever seen by courtesy of the walrus and eggheads back at P2C2E House. Around the rim of each helmet was a sort of hat band that lit up brightly when the helmet was worn. This made the pages of Gup look rather like a regiment of angels or saints, because they all had shining halos around their heads. The combined wattage of all those halos would just about enable the Guppies to see their opponents, even in the perpetual darkness, while the Chupwalas, even with their fashionable wraparound dark glasses on, might be somewhat dazzled by the glare. This certainly is state-of-the-art warfare, thought Rashid ironically. Neither army will even be able to see properly during the fight. Outside Chup City lay the battlefield, the wide plain of Bat-Mat Caro, which had little hills at each end, where the rival commanders could pitch their tents and watch the battle's course. General Khatib, Prince Bolo, and Mudra were joined on the Guppy command hill by Rashid the storyteller, who was needed because only he could translate Mudra's gesture language to the others, and a detachment or pamphlet of pages, including Blabbermouth, to act as messengers and guards. The Guppy commanders, all looking slightly silly in their red noses, sat down to a light pre-battle dinner in their tent. While they were eating, a Chupwala rode up to meet them, a little clerky fellow wearing on his hooded cloak the sign of the zipped lips and carrying a white flag of truce. "Well, Chupwala," said Prince Bolo, dashing and rather foolishly. "What's your business? My," he added impolitely, "what a measly-weasly, sniveling, driveling sort of fellow you are." "Spots and fogs, Bolo," boomed General Khatib. "That's no way to address an ambassador who comes under a white flag." The ambassador gave an evil little grin of unconcern and then spoke. "The High Cultmaster Khatum Shud has granted me special release from my vows of silence so that this message may be delivered," he said in a low, hissing voice. "He sends you greetings and informs you that you are all trespassing on the sacred soil of Chup. He will neither negotiate with you nor give up your spying, nosy Parker of Batcheat. And, oh, but she's noisy, too," the ambassador added, clearly speaking for himself now. "She torments our ears with her songs. And as for her nose, her teeth—" "There's no need to go into that," interrupted General Khatib. "Drat it all. We aren't interested in your opinions. Complete your confounded message." The Chupwalla ambassador cleared his throat. Katam Shud therefore warned you that unless you retreat at once, your illegal invasion will be punished by annihilation, and Prince Bolo of Gup will be brought into chains to the citadel so that he may personally witness the sewing up of Batcheat Chattergee's caterwauling mouth. Knave, scandal, rapscallion, bounder, rogue, shouted Prince Bolo. I should cut off your ears, have them sautéed in a little butter and garlic, and served to the hounds. However, continued the Chupwalla ambassador, ignoring Bolo's outburst completely, before you utter defeat, I am commanded to entertain you for a moment, if you permit. I am, if I may immodestly say it, the finest juggler in Chup, and am ordered to juggle, if you should so wish, for your delight. Blabbermouth, who was standing behind Prince Bolo's chair, here burst out, Don't trust him! It's a trick! General Khatib, with his love of argument, seemed perfectly willing to discuss this possibility, but Bolo waved a royal arm and cried, Silence, page! The rules of chivalry demand our acceptance. And to the Chupwalla ambassador he said, as haughtily as he could manage, Fellow, we will see you juggle. The ambassador began his performance. From the depths of his cloak he produced a bewildering variety of objects, ebony balls, 9 pins, jade statuettes, porcelain teacups, live terrapins, lighted cigarettes, hats, and flung them into the air in mesmerizing hoops and whirls. The faster he juggled, the more complicated the juggling became, and his audience was so completely hypnotized by his skill that only one person in the tent saw the moment at which one extra object was added to the flying cavalcade. A little, heavy rectangular box out of which protruded a short, burning fuse. Will you for Pete's sake look out? Yelled Blabbermouth, rushing forwards and sending Prince Bolo and his chair flying sideways. The guy's got a live bomb. She had reached the Chupwalla ambassador in 2 strides, and using her sharp eye and every ounce of her own juggling skills, she plucked the bomb right out of the rising, falling, dancing array of objects in the air. The other pages seized the Chupwalla, and statuettes and teacups and terrapins all plummeted to the ground, but Blabbermouth was rushing to the edge of the command hill as fast as her legs would carry her, and when she reached the edge she threw the bomb away down the hillside, where it exploded in an enormous but now harmless ball of glowing black flames. The helmet had fallen from her head. Her long hair cascaded around her shoulders for all to see. Bolo, the general, Mudra, and Rashid rushed out of the tent where they heard the explosion. Blabbermouth was out of breath, but grinning happily. So, we just about got that in time, she said. What a creep that Chupwalla was. He was ready to commit suicide, to get blown up right along with us. I told you it was a trick. Prince Bolo, who didn't like his pages to say, I told you so, snapped back. What's this, Blabbermouth? Are you a girl? You noticed, sire, said Blabbermouth. No pretending any more. You tricked us, said Bolo, blushing. You tricked me. Blabbermouth was outraged by Bolo's ingratitude. Tricking you isn't exactly difficult. Excuse me, she cried. Jugglers can do it, so why not girls? Bolo went red in the face behind his red nose-warmer. You're fired, he shouted at the top of his voice. Bolo? Hang it all, began General Khatib. Oh, no, I'm not, Blabbermouth shouted back. Mister, I quit. Mudra, the shadow warrior, had been observing these goings-on with an utterly inscrutable expression on his green face. Now, however, his hands began to move, his legs to adopt eloquent positions, his facial muscles to ripple and twitch. Rashid translated, We must not quarrel when the battle is about to begin. If Prince Bolo has no further need of so courageous a page, then perhaps Miss Blabbermouth would care to work for me. At which Prince Bolo of Gup looked crestfallen and ashamed, and Miss Blabbermouth looked exceptionally pleased. The battle was joined at last. Rashid Khalifa, watching the action from the Guppy command hill, was very much afraid that the pages of Gup would be beaten badly. Torn up would be the right term for pages, I suppose, he reflected, or perhaps burned. His sudden capacity for bloodthirsty thoughts amazed him. I suppose war makes people crude, he told himself. The black-nosed Chupwalla army, whose menacing silence hung over it like a fog, looked too frightening to lose. Meanwhile, the Guppies were still busily arguing over every little detail. Every order sent down from the command hill had to be debated fully, and all its pros and cons, even if it came from General Khatib himself. How is it possible to fight a battle with all this chatter and matter? Rashid pondered, perplexed. But then the armies rushed at each other, and Rashid saw, to his great surprise, that the Chupwallas were quite unable to resist the Guppies. The pages of Gup, now that they had talked through everything so fully, fought hard, remained united, supported each other when required to do so, and in general looked like a force with a common purpose. All these arguments and debates, all that openness had created powerful bonds of fellowship between them. The Chupwallas, on the other hand, turned out to be a disunited rabble. Just as Mudra the Shadow Warrior had predicted, many of them actually had to fight their own treacherous shadows. And as for the rest, well, their vows of silence and their habits of secrecy had made them suspicious and distrustful of one another. They had no faith in their generals either. The upshot was that the Chupwallas did not stand shoulder to shoulder, but betrayed one another, stabbed one another in the back, mutinied, hid, deserted, and after the shortest clash imaginable, simply threw down all their weapons and ran away. After the victory of Batmat Karo, the army or library of Gup entered Chup City in triumph. At the sight of Mudra, many Chupwallas threw in their lot with the Guppies. Chupwalla maidens rushed black-nosed into the icy streets and garlanded the red-nosed and halo-headed Guppies with black snowdrops and kissed them too and called them liberators of Chup. Blabbermouth, her loose flowing hair no longer concealed beneath a velvet cap or halo helmet, attracted the attention of several of the young lads of Chup City, but she stayed as close as she could to Mudra, as did Rashid Khalifa, and both Rashid and Blabbermouth found their thoughts turning constantly to Haroun. Where was he? Was he safe? Would he return? Prince Bolo was out in front on his prancing mechanical horse, began to shout out in his habitual dashing but rather foolish way. "Where are you, Katumshud? Come out. Your minions are defeated, and now it's your turn. Batcheat, never fear, Bolo is here. Where are you, Batcheat, my golden girl, my love, Batcheat? Oh, Batcheat mine." "If you'd be quiet for a moment, you'd know soon enough where your Batcheat waits," a Chupwalla voice called out from the crowd that had gathered to greet the Guppies. Many Chupwallas had started breaking the laws of silence now, cheering, shouting, and so on. "Yes, use your ears," a woman's voice agreed. "Can't you hear that racket? That's been driving us all to drink." "She sings?" Prince Bolo exclaimed, cupping a hand around his ear. "My Batcheat sings?" "Then hush, friends, and hearken to her song." He raised an arm. The Guppy parade came to a halt, and now, wafting down to them from the citadel of Chup, came a woman's voice singing songs of love. It was the most horrible voice Rashid Khalifa, the Shah of Blah, had heard in all his life. If that's Batcheat, he thought, but did not dare to say, then you can almost understand why the cult master wants to shut her up for good. "Oh, I'm talking about my Bolo, and I ain't got time for nothing else," sang Batcheat, and glass shattered in shop windows. "I'm sure I know that song, but the words seem different," puzzled Rashid. "Let me tell you about a boy I know. He's my Bolo, and I love him so," sang Batcheat, and men and women in the crowd begged, "No more, no more." Rashid frowned and shook his head. Yes, it's very familiar too, but not exactly right. "He won't play polo, he can't fly solo, ooh-wee, but I love him true, our love will grow low. I'll never let him go low. Got those waiting for my Bolo blues." Oh my God, this is horrible. "Mr. Rushdie," sang Batcheat, and Prince Bolo shouted, "Beautiful! That's so beautiful!" To which the crowd of Chupwallas rejoined, "Arr, somebody stop her, please. His name ain't Rollo, his voice ain't Lolo. But I love him fine, so stop the show-lo. Pay me what you owe-lo, I'm gonna make that Bolo mine," sang Batcheat, and Prince Bolo, cavorting on his horse, almost swooned with delight. "Just listen to that," he rhapsodized. "Is that a voice, or what is it?" "It must be a what is it," the crowd shouted back, "because a voice it is certainly not." Prince Bolo was deeply miffed. "These persons obviously cannot appreciate fine contemporary singing," he said loudly to General Khatib and Mudra, "so I think we should attack the citadel now, if you don't mind." Oh, Miranda Lambert could play that girl. At that moment, a miracle happened. The ground shook beneath their feet. Once, twice, thrice, the houses of Chup City trembled. Many Chupwallas and Guppies, too, cried out in terror. Prince Bolo fell off his horse. An earthquake! An earthquake! People shouted, but it was no ordinary earthquake. It was the entire moon, Kahani, with a mighty shuddering and a mighty juddering, spinning on its axis towards the... Look at the sky! Voices were shouting. Look what's coming up over the horizon! Towards the sun. The sun was rising over Chup City, over the citadel of Chup. It was rising rapidly and went on rising until it was directly overhead, blazing down in the fiery fury of its noonday heat, and there it stayed. Many Chupwallas, including Mudra, the shadow warrior, took really rather fashionable wrap-around dark sunglasses out of their pockets and put them on. Sunrise! It tore away the shrouds of silence and shadow which the sorcery of Khatum Shud had hung around the citadel. The black ice of that dark fortress received the sunlight like a mortal wound. The locks on the citadel gates melted away. Prince Bolo, with drawn sword, galloped through the open gates, followed by Mudra and several chapters of pages. "Batcheat!" Bolo shouted as he charged. His horse whinnied at the name. "Bolo!" came the faraway reply. Bolo dismounted, and with Mudra ran up flights of stairs and through courtyards and up yet more staircases, while all around him the pillars of Khatum Shud's citadel, softened by the sun's heat, began to buckle and bend. Arches were drooping, cupolas melting. The shadowless servants of the cult master, the members of the unions of the zipped lips, were running blindly hither and yon, smashing into walls, knocking one another out as they collided, and shrieking dreadfully, all laws of silence forgotten in their fear. It was the moment of Khatum Shud's final destruction. As Bolo and the shadow warrior leapt upwards into the melting heart of the citadel, the prince's cries of "Batcheat!" brought walls and towers tumbling down, and at last, just as they were despairing about her safety, the Princess Batcheat came into sight with that nose and a black Chupwalla nose warmer. Those teeth, but there's no need to go into that. Let's just say there was no question but that it was indeed Batcheat, followed by her handmaidens, sliding down towards them along the banister of a great staircase whose steps had melted away. Bolo waited. Batcheat flew off the banister into his arms. He staggered backwards, but did not fall. Now, the air was full of a great groaning noise as Bolo, Batcheat, Mudra, and the handmaidens fled down, down, through soggy courtyards and down squashy staircases. They looked back and saw high above them, at the very apex of the citadel, the gigantic ice statue, the colossal ice idol of tongueless, grinning, many-toothed Bezaban, beginning to totter and shake, and then drunkenly it fell. It was like the fall of a mountain. What remained of the halls and courtyards of the citadel of Chup was utterly smashed as Bezaban crashed down. The statue's huge head snapped off at the neck and came rolling and bouncing down the terraces of the citadel towards the lowest courtyard, where Bolo, Mudra, and the ladies stood now at the citadel's gates, watching these events with fascinated horror, with Rashid Khalifa, General Khatib, and a great host of Guppies and Chupwallas gathering at their backs. Down and down the great head bounced, its ears, its nose broke off as it hit the ground, the teeth fell from its mouth, down and down it came. Then "Look!" shouted Rashid Khalifa, pointing, and at a moment later, "Look out!" He had seen an unimpressive little figure in a hooded cloak come scurrying out into its lowest courtyard of the citadel, a skinny, scrawny, sniveling, driveling, mingy, stingy, measly, weaselly, clerkish sort of fellow, who had no shadow, but seemed almost as much a shadow as a man. It was the cult master, Khatum Shud, running for his life. He heard Rashid's cry, too late, whirled around with a fiendish yell, and saw the huge head of the Colossus of Bezaban as it arrived, hitting him squarely on the nose. It crushed him to bits. Not a shred of him was ever seen again. The head, grinning toothlessly, sat in that courtyard and continued to slowly melt. Peace broke out. The new government of the land of Chup, headed by Mudra, announced its desire for a long and lasting peace with Gup, a peace in which night and day, speech and silence would no longer be separated into zones by twilight strips and walls of force. Mudra invited Miss Blabbermouth to stay with him, to learn the gesture language, so that she might act as go-between for Guppy authorities and those of Chup, and Blabbermouth accepted gladly. In the meanwhile, guppy water genies on flying mechanical birds were sent to search the ocean, and after a short time they located an incapacitated hoopoe being drawn north by Goopy and Baga, with 3 exhausted but happy spies on its back. Haroun was reunited with his father and with Blabbermouth, who seemed oddly awkward and shy in his presence, which was more or less how he felt in hers. They met on the shores of Chup in what had been the twilight strip, and everyone set off contentedly for Gup City because there was a marriage to arrange. Back in Gup City, the speaker of the Chatterbox announced certain promotions. If was named Chief Water Genie, Molly was named Head Floating Gardener, and Goopy and Baga were appointed leaders of all the Plentama fishes in the sea. These 4 were given the joint responsibility for the very large cleaning up operation, which was to begin at once across the length and breadth of the ocean of the streams of stories. They announced that they were especially anxious to restore the old zone as soon as possible, so that these ancient tales could be fresh and new once more. Rashid Khalifa was given back his story water facilities and awarded the land of Gup's highest decoration, the Order of the Open Mouth, in recognition of his exceptional services during the war. The newly appointed Chief Water Genie agreed to reconnect Rashid's water supply personally, but the hoopoe was quickly restored to its normal self just as soon as the Gup service station had fitted it with its spare brains, and Princess Batsheet? She had survived her imprisonment unharmed, although her fear of having her mouth sewn up had left her with a hatred of needles that would last her whole life. And on the day of her wedding to Prince Bolo, the 2 of them looked so happy and so much in love as they stood on the palace balcony, waving to the crowd of guppies and visiting Chupwallas gathered below, that everyone decided to forget about how incredibly idiotic Batsheet had been to get herself captured in the first place, and about Bolo's many pieces of foolish behavior during the war that followed. After all, if the water genie whispered to Haroun as they stood together on the balcony a little way from the happy couple, it's not as if we really let our crowned heads do anything very important around here. A great victory has been won, old King Chattergy was saying to the crowd. A victory for our ocean over its enemy, but also a victory for the new friendship and openness between Chup and Gup over our old hostility and suspicion. A dialogue has been opened, and to celebrate that, as well as this wedding, let all the people sing. Even better, suggested Bolo, let Batsheet serenade us. Let her golden voice be heard. There was a brief silence. Then, with one voice, the crowd roared, "No, not that. Spare us that, if you please." Batsheet and Bolo both looked so hurt that it was necessary for old King Chattergy to save the day by saying soothingly, "What the people mean is that on your wedding day they wish to show their love by singing to you," which was not precisely true, but it cheered the couple up, and then the square was full of song. Batsheet kept her mouth shut, and everyone was as happy as could be. As he left the balcony behind the royal party, Haroun was approached by an egghead. "You are to present yourself at once at P2C2E House," the egghead said coldly. "The walrus wants to talk to the person who destroyed so much irreplaceable machinery so willfully." "But it was in a good cause," Haroun protested. The egghead shrugged. "I don't know about that," he said as he walked off. "That's for you to argue and the walrus to decide." Are you kidding? That walrus. Cuckoo-ca-choo walrus. Chapter 12. Was it the walrus? "What I need is witnesses," Haroun decided. "Once If and Molly tell the walrus why I had to make my wish, he'll understand about his broken machinery." A wild party was getting under way in the royal palace, and it took Haroun a few minutes to find the chief water genie in the balloon-popping, rice-throwing, steamer-waving throng. He finally located If, whose turban was a little askew, dancing frenziedly with a young woman genie. Haroun had to shout to make himself heard over the music and general hubbub, and then, to his horror, he saw If purse his lips and shake his head. "Sorry," said the chief water genie. "Argue with the walrus? Not worth the candle. Include me out? No can do." But if you've got to, Haroun pleaded, somebody has to explain. Explanation's not my forte, If yelled back. Not my suit. I'm not good at them. Not my thing at all. Haroun rolled his eyes in frustration and went in search of Molly. He found the head floating gardener at the second wedding party, which was being held on and under the lagoon for the benefit of those guppies, the Plentama fishes, and the floating gardeners who preferred a watery setting. Molly was very easy to spot. He was standing on the back of Butt the Hoopoe with his hat of weeds tilted at a jaunty angle, and he was singing lustily to an enthusiastic audience of fishes and gardeners. You can melt dark ships, you can melt what's shadowy, you can melt ice castles, but you can't melt me. Molly, called Haroun, help! The head floating gardener broke off his song, took off his hat of weeds, scratched his head, and said through his floral lips, Walrus, you're on the carpet. Heard all about it. Big problem. Sorry, can't assist. What's the matter with everyone? Cried Haroun. What's so scary about this walrus anyway? He seemed okay when I met him before, even if his mustache wasn't really very like a walrus mustache. Molly shook his head sadly. Walrus? Important fellow. Wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of him. You take my meaning. Oh, honestly, Haroun shouted crossly. I'll just have to go and face the music alone. Some friends. No point even asking me, which you didn't, Butt the Hoopoe called after him, without moving his beak. I'm only a machine. As Haroun passed through the huge doors of P2C2E House, his heart sank. He stood in the vast echoing entrance hall as white-cloaked eggheads walked rapidly past him in every direction. Haroun fancied that they all eyed him with a mixture of anger, contempt, and pity. He had to ask 3 eggheads the way to Walrus's office before he finally found it after mazy wanderings around P2C2E House that reminded him of following Blabbermouth around the palace. At last, however, he was standing in front of a golden door on which there were written the words, Grand Comptroller of Process Too Complicated to Explain, IMD Walrus Esquire, Knock and Wait. Here I am at last, about to get the interview for which I came to Kahani in the first place, Haroun reflected nervously, but it wasn't supposed to be this sort of an interview at all. He took a deep breath and knocked. The walrus's voice called, Come in. Haroun took another breath and opened the door. The first thing he saw was the walrus sitting on a shiny white chair at a shiny yellow desk, with his large hairless egg-shaped head shining as brightly as the furniture and the mustache on his upper lip twitching feverishly in what could have been anger. The second thing Haroun noticed was that the walrus was not alone. In the walrus's office, grinning broadly, were King Chattergee, Prince Bolo, Princess Batshee, the speaker of the Chatterbox, President Mudra of Chup, and his aide, Miss Blabbermouth, General Khatib, If, Molly, and Rashid Khalifa, too. On the wall was a video monitor on which Haroun saw Goopy and Baga grinning at him from under the lagoon's surface, grinning with every one of their mouths. But the hoopoes' heads stared out at him from a second such monitor. Haroun was flabbergasted. Am I in trouble or not? He managed to inquire. Everybody in the room burst into laughter. You must forgive us, the walrus said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes and still giggling slightly. We were pulling your leg. Just our little yoke. Little yoke, he repeated, and burst out laughing all over again. Then what's this all about? Haroun asked. The walrus pulled himself together and put on his most serious face, which would have been fine except that he then caught If's eye, and that set him off laughing again, and that set If off again, and that set everyone else off. It was several minutes before order returned. Haroun Khalifa, said the walrus, getting onto his feet, still slightly out of breath and holding his aching sides, to honor you for the incalculable service you have done to the peoples of Kahani and to the ocean of the streams of story, we grant you the right to ask of us whatever favor you desire, and we promise to grant it if we possibly can, even if it means inventing a brand new process too complicated to explain. Haroun was silent. Well, Haroun? Asked Rashid. Any ideas? Haroun was silent again, looking suddenly unhappy. It was Blabbermouth who understood his mood and came over to him, took his hand and asked, What is it? What's the matter? It's no use asking for anything, Haroun answered in a low voice, because what I really want is something nobody here can give me. Nonsense, retorted the walrus. I know perfectly well what you want. You've been on a great adventure, and at the end of great adventures, everybody wants the same thing. Oh, and what's that? Asked Haroun a little belligerently. A happy ending, the walrus said. That shut Haroun up. Isn't it the truth? The walrus pressed him. Well, yes, I suppose it is, Haroun admitted uncomfortably, but the happy ending I'm thinking of isn't something you can find in any sea, even a sea with plenty fishes in it. The walrus nodded slowly and judiciously 7 times. Then he put his fingertips together and sat down at his desk, motioning to Haroun and the rest that they should be seated too. Haroun sat in a shiny white chair facing the walrus across the desk. The others sat in similar chairs that were lined up against the walls. Ahem, the walrus began. Happy endings are much rarer in stories, and also in life, than most people think. You could almost say they are the exceptions, not the rule. You agree with me then? Said Haroun. So that's that. It is precisely because happy endings are so rare, the walrus continued, that we at P2C2E House haven't learned how to synthesize them artificially. In plain language, we can make them up. That's impossible, Haroun protested. There aren't things you can put in, they aren't things you can put in bottles. But then he added uncertainly, are they? If Khatum Shute could synthesize anti-stories, said the walrus, with just a hint of injured pride, I should think you'd accept that we can synthesize things too. As for impossible, he went on, most people would say that everything that's happened to you lately is quite impossible. Why make a fuss about this particular impossible thing? There was a further silence. Well, then, Haroun said boldly, you said it could be a big wish, and so it is. I come from a sad city, a city so sad that it has forgotten its name. I want you to provide a happy ending not just for my adventure, but for the whole sad city as well. Happy endings must come at the end of something, the walrus pointed out. If they happen in the middle of a story or an adventure or the like, all they do is cheer things up for a while. That'll do, said Haroun. Then it was time to go home. They went quickly because Haroun hated long goodbyes. Saying goodbye to Blabbermouth proved particularly difficult, and if she hadn't leant forward without warning and kissed him, Haroun would probably have never found a way of kissing her. But when it was done, he found he wasn't embarrassed in the least, but felt extremely pleased, which made it even harder to leave. At the foot of the pleasure garden, Haroun and Rashid waved goodbye to their friends and climbed with If onto the back of Butt the Hoopoe. Only now did it occur to Haroun that Rashid must have missed his storytelling appointment in K, and so no doubt an angry, snooty Buto would be waiting for them when they returned to the dull lake. But never mind, Butt the Hoopoe said without moving its beak. When you travel with Butt the Hoopoe, time is on your side. Leave late, arrive early. Let's go. Va-va-room. Night had fallen over the dull lake. Haroun saw the houseboat, Arabian Nights +1, lying peacefully at the anchor in the moonlight. They landed by an open bedroom window, and as Haroun climbed in, he was overwhelmed by fatigue, and there was nothing for it but to flop onto his peacock bed and go straight to sleep. When he woke, it was a bright sunny morning. Everything seemed as it had always been. Of flying mechanical hoopoes and water genies there was no trace. He got up, rubbing his eyes, and found Rashid Khalifa sitting on the little balcony at the front of the houseboat, still in his long blue nightshirt, sipping a cup of tea. A boat in the shape of a swan was coming towards them across the lake. I had such a strange dream, Rashid Khalifa began, but he was interrupted by the voice of Snooty Buto, who was waving energetically from the swan boat. Hoo-halloo, called Mr. Buto. Oh, Lord, thought Haroun. Now there will be screaming and shouting. We'll have to pay our own bill. Who, somnolent Mr. Rashid, called Buto. Can it be that you and your son are still in your nightshirts when I am coming to fetch you for the show? Crowds are waiting, tardy Mr. Rashid. I trust you will not disappoint. It seemed that the entire adventure of Kahani had passed off in less than a single night, but that's impossible, thought Haroun, which made him remember the walrus asking, why make a fuss about this particular impossible thing? And so he turned urgently to his father and asked, your dream, can you recall it? Not now, Haroun, said Rashid Khalifa, who then called over to the approaching Mr. Buto. Why so anxious, sir? Come aboard, take tea. We will quickly dress and be off. To Haroun he said, look sharp, son. The Shah of Blah is never late. The ocean of notions has a reputation for punctuality to preserve. The ocean, Haroun urged as Buto drew near in the swan boat. Please think, it's very important. But Rashid wasn't listening at all. Haroun went off somewhat disconsolately to get dressed, and now he noticed a little golden envelope lying by his pillow, an envelope of the type in which grand hotels sometimes leave nighttime mint chocolates for their guests. Inside was a note written by Blabbermouth and signed by her and by all his friends from the moon Kahani. Goopy and Baga, who couldn't write, had placed fishy lips upon the paper, sending kisses instead of signatures. Come whenever you want, the note said. Stay as long as you like. Remember, when you fly with But the Hoopoe, time is on your side. There was something else in the golden envelope, a tiny bird, perfect in every detail, cocking its head up at him. It was, of course, the Hoopoe. That wash and brush-up certainly did you a world of good, Rashid said, as Haroun emerged from his room. I haven't seen you looking so pleased with life for months. You'll recall that Mr. Bhutto and his unpopular local government were expecting Rashid Khalifa to win them the people's support by telling upbeat, praising sagas and cutting out the gloom-puss yarns. They had decked out a large park with every sort of happy decoration, bunting, streamers, flags, and they had put loudspeakers on poles all over the park so that everyone could hear the Shah of Blah properly. There was a colorful stage plastered with posters that said, Vote Bhutto, or alternatively, Who's the one for you? Not just one, but oh, so I guess it was but two. Not just one, but two. Oh my God, that's bad. And a large crowd that indeed gathered to hear Rashid. From their scowling expressions, Haroun gathered that the people didn't care for Batu at all. You're on, snapped Mr. Batu. Much praise, Mr. Rashid. You'd better be good, or else. Haroun watched from the side of the stage as Rashid went smiling to the microphone amid generous applause. Then he gave Haroun a real shock because his first words were, Ladies and gentlemen, the name of the tale I'm going to tell is Haroun and the Sea of Stories. So you didn't forget, Haroun thought with a smile. Rashid Khalifa, the ocean of notions, the Shah of Blah, looked across to his son and winked. Did you think I'd forget a story like this one? Said the wink, and he began. There was once in the country of Alif Bay a sad city, the saddest of cities, a city so ruinously sad that it had forgotten its name. As you will have guessed, Rashid told the people in that park the same story I've just told you. Haroun decided his father must have asked If and the others about the bits at which he hadn't personally been present because his account of them was so accurate, and it was plain that he was okay again. The gift of gab had returned, and he had the audience right in the palm of his hand. When he sang Molly's songs, they all sang along. You can chop suey, but you can't chop me. And when he sang Batcheat's song, they begged for mercy. Whenever Rashid was talking about Katam Shud and his henchmen from the union of the zipped lips, the whole audience stared very hard at Snooty Batu and his henchmen, who were sitting behind Rashid on the stage, looking less and less happy as the story unfolded. And when Rashid told the audience how almost all the Chupwallas had hated the cult master all along but had been afraid to say so, well, then a loud murmur of sympathy for the Chupwallas ran through the crowd. Yes, people muttered, we know exactly how they felt. And after the two falls of the two Katum Shuds, somebody started up a chant of Mr. Batu, go for good, Mr. Batu, Katum Shud. Oh my God. And the entire audience joined in. On hearing this chant, Snooty Batu understood that the game was up and went slinking with his henchmen off the stage. The crowd allowed him to escape, but pelted him with rubbish as he fled. Mr. Batu was never seen again in the Valley of Kay, which left the people of the valley free to choose leaders they actually liked. Of course, we didn't get paid, Rashid told Haroun cheerfully as they waited for the mail coach to take them out of the valley. But never mind, money isn't everything. But, said a familiar voice from the driver's seat of the mail coach. No money is nothing at all. It was still raining cats and dogs when they returned to the sad city. Many of the streets were flooded. Who cares? Rashid Khalifa cried gaily. Let's walk home. I haven't had a good soaking in years. Haroun had been worried that Rashid would be depressed about returning to the apartment full of broken clocks and no Soraya. So he gave his father a suspicious look. But Rashid skipped out into the wet, and the wetter he got as they walked through the shin-deep muddy water, the more boyishly happy he became. Haroun began to catch his father's good mood, and soon the two of them were splashing and chasing each other like children. After a while, Haroun noticed that, as a matter of fact, the city streets were full of people fooling around in the same way, running and jumping and splashing and falling, and above all, laughing their heads off. Looks like this old city finally learned how to have fun, Rashid grinned. But why? Haroun asked. Nothing's really changed, has it? Look, the sadness factories are still in production. You can see the smoke, and almost everybody is still poor. "Hey, you long face!" shouted an elderly gent who must have been at least 70 years old, but who was dancing through the flooded, rainy streets, waving a rolled umbrella like a sword. "Don't you sing those tragedy songs round here." Rashid Khalifa approached this gentleman. "We've been out of town, sir," he said. "Has something happened while we've been away? A miracle, for example?" "It's just the rain," replied the old bird. "It's making everybody happy, me included. Wee whoopee!" And he skipped down the road. "It's the walrus," Haroun realized suddenly. "It's the walrus making my wish come true. There must be artificial happy endings mixed up with the rain." "If it is the walrus," said Rashid, doing a little jig in a puddle, "then the city owes you a big vote of thanks." "Don't, Dad," said Haroun, his good mood deflating all at once. "Don't you get it? It isn't real. It's just something the eggheads got out of a bottle. It's all fake. People should be happy when there's something to be happy about, not just when they get bottled happiness poured over them from the sky." "I'll tell you what to be happy about," said a policeman, who chanced to be floating by on an upturned umbrella. "We remembered the city's name." "Well, out with it. Tell us quickly," Rashid insisted, feeling very excited. "Kahani," said the policeman brightly as he floated off down the flooded street. "Isn't it a beautiful name for a city? It means story, you know." They turned into their own lane and saw their house, looking like a soggy cake in the rain. Rashid was still hopping and bounding gaily along, but Haroun's feet grew heavier with each step. He was finding his father's cheerfulness simply unbearable, and he blamed the walrus for it all, for everything, for all that was bad and wrong and fake in the whole wide, motherless world. Miss Onita came out on her upstairs balcony. "Oh, too fine! You are returned. Come, come, what sweets and celebrations we will have!" She was wobbling and bobbling and clapping her hands for joy. "What is there to celebrate?" Haroun demanded at Miss Onita, as Miss Onita came scurrying down to join him and his father in the rainy street. "To speak personally," Miss Onita replied, "I have said good riddance to Mr. Sengupta, and I also have a job in the chocolate factory, and as many chocolates as I require are free of charge. And also I have several admirers. But listen to me, how shameless, talking like this to you." "I'm happy for you," Haroun replied, "but in our life it is not all songs and dances." Miss Onita put on a mysterious expression. "Maybe you have been away too long," she said. "Things change." This made Rashid frown. "Onita, what are you talking about? If you have something to tell—" The front door of the Khalifa apartment opened, and there stood Soraya Khalifa, as large as life and twice as beautiful. Haroun and Rashid couldn't move. They stayed frozen like statues in the pouring rain, with their mouths hanging open. Was this the walrus's work, too? Rashid murmured to Haroun, who just shook his head. Rashid answered himself, "Who knows? Maybe so and maybe no," as our friend the mail coach driver would say. Soraya had come out to join them in the rain. "What walrus?" she asked. "I don't know any walrus, but I know that I made a mistake. I went, I don't deny. I went, but now if you want, then I am back." Haroun looked at his father. Rashid couldn't speak. "That Sengupta, I swear," Soraya went on. "What a skinny, scrawny, sniveling, driveling, mingy, stingy, measly, weasley clerk. As far as I'm concerned, he's finished with, done for, gone for good." "Katam Shud," Haroun said quietly. "That's right," his mother answered. "I promise Mr. Sengupta is Katam Shud." "Welcome home," Rashid said, and the three Khalifas, and Miss Onita too, fell into one another's arms. "Come inside," Soraya suggested eventually. "There is a limit to how much rain a person can enjoy." That night, when he went to bed, Haroun took the miniaturized Butt the Hoopoe out of his little golden envelope and put it on the palm of his left hand. "Please understand," he said to the Hoopoe, "it's really good to know that you'll be here when I need you. But the way things are just now, I honestly don't need to go anywhere at all." But," said the miniaturized Hoopoe in a miniaturized voice and without moving his beak. "No problem." Haroun put Butt the Hoopoe back in its envelope, put the envelope under his pillow, put the pillow under his head, and fell asleep. When he woke up, there were new clothes laid out at the foot of his bed, and on his bedside table was a new clock, fully operational and telling the right time. Presents, he wondered? What's all this? Then he remembered it was his birthday. He could hear his mother and father moving about in the apartment, waiting for him to emerge. He got up, dressed in his new clothes, and took a closer look at his new clock. Yes, he nodded to himself. Time is definitely on the move again around these parts. Outside in the living room, his mother had begun to sing. The end. There's a couple pages in the back here that I'm not going to read that are about the names in the book. So if you choose to read the book yourself, you got reason to go out and buy it, right? There's a little something else in there. Well, Mr. Rushdie, certainly was not worth losing an eye over, was it? I can't believe somebody did that to you. I mean, no, I take it back. I can believe it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have written the book. That's not what I meant. I mean, oh my God. What kind of horrible oppression would make somebody commit such violence over such a story? And also, isn't this story extremely appropriate for right now? Anyway, I still haven't decided what I'm going to read next, so you'll just have to wait and see.